You open your phone. Someone you love just lost someone they love. You type 4 words. So sorry for your loss. Add a heart, maybe a candle emoji because typing an actual candle felt too strange, and you hit send. 10 seconds, and the obligation is met. Now delete the phone, delete the funeral home, the sympathy card, the grief podcast. Go back past writing, past cities, past agriculture, to a point where losing someone wasn't a scheduled event with a program and a guest book. It just happened, in the dirt, with nothing standing between you and the body. Every single one of your ancestors, for roughly 300,000 years, had to face that moment with no ritual handed down to them. They had to invent grief from nothing, over and over, long before anyone thought to write any of it down. In a cave in the mountains of northern Iraq, archaeologists found something next to a set of extremely old bones that made some of them argue our species might not be the only one that ever grieved, and made other archaeologists furious at the suggestion. What isn't in question is this. Thousands of years before the first pyramid went up, humans were already spending their most valuable resource, time, on people who could no longer use it. So how old is grief, really? And why does losing someone still feel, physically, like getting hurt? Start with the clearest evidence first. In central Russia, at a site called Sungir, archaeologists uncovered a grave holding 2 children laid head-to-head, roughly 10 and 13 years old. They were covered, from head to foot, in over 10,000 carved ivory beads. Alongside them, the burial also held a mammoth ivory spear, straightened by hand, and dozens of small ivory animal carvings, tools nobody could ever use again. Archaeologist Randall White, who has spent decades studying the site at New York University, estimates the beadwork alone took thousands of hours of skilled labor to produce. Hours. A small group of hunter-gatherers 34,000 years ago could have spent hunting, gathering, staying alive. Here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. Why would people who needed every single hour to survive spend that many of them on someone who was already gone? The answer isn't sentimental, even though it looks that way. A funeral this elaborate is a signal, aimed at the living, not the dead. It tells everyone watching, this group takes care of its own, even after there's nothing left to gain. That kind of reputation was survival currency. People who trusted a group to grieve them properly were more willing to hunt with it, share with it, raise children inside it. The beads weren't wasted on the dead. Anthropologists call this costly signaling. The idea that a gesture only counts as genuine proof of commitment when it actually costs something to make. They were an investment in everyone still breathing, roughly the ancient equivalent of taking 2 months off work, unpaid, to hand-finish a single thank you card. And Sungir isn't alone. On the other side of the planet, at a dried lakebed in Australia called Lake Mungo, archaeologists found a burial nearly as old. The body dusted in crushed red ochre so heavy it stained the surrounding soil. Nobody left instructions at either site. But 10,000 hand-carved beads don't happen by accident, and neither does a body packed in red pigment. Something was already being said on 2 different continents before either group had ever heard of the other. Push even further back, and the evidence gets stranger still. In Border Cave in southern Africa, a child was buried close to 74,000 years ago with a single perforated shell pendant resting near the body, a small, deliberate gesture tens of thousands of years before either Sungir or Lake Mungo. By then, this behavior wasn't new. It was already old. For a long time, the working assumption among historians was that ritual mourning like this was a byproduct of religion and farming, That once humans settled down, built temples, and started asking bigger questions about death, grief got formalized into ceremony. Agriculture is roughly 12,000 years old. Sun Gear and Lake Mungo are both close to 3 times older than that. Grief didn't wait for civilization. It arrived first, and civilization eventually caught up to it. And it isn't just old. It might not even be uniquely ours. Grief, it turns out, isn't only a story problem or a ritual problem. It's a physical one. Mary Frances O'Connor, a neuroscientist who studies mourning, has scanned the brains of grieving people while showing them photos of who they lost. The regions that lit up overlap heavily with the regions that fire when your body registers physical injury. The same alarm system repurposed. Your brain filed a full incident report over a stubbed toe last week. It is entirely capable of telling the difference between that and losing someone. It just doesn't bother filing grief under a separate category. As far as your nervous system is concerned, it's all damage. That overlap is also why grief leaves people exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. The same systems your body uses to recover from a physical wound are running around the clock. On a wound, nobody can stitch closed. There's a reason for that, and it isn't a design flaw. Researchers who study grief through the lens of attachment, the same wiring that keeps an infant crying until a parent comes back, argue that grief is that exact system left running with nowhere to go. When a hunting partner wandered off and got separated, the ache of missing them was useful. It made you search, call out, keep the bond alive until reunion was possible. When the separation is permanent, the alarm doesn't know that. It just keeps ringing. It's the same reason you might still reach for your phone to call someone who's gone, half a second before your brain catches up and remembers there's no one on the other end. Evolution built the system to make you search. It never built an off switch for the searches that can't succeed. Here's a piece of this story most people have never heard, and it's the reason the topic still makes archaeologists nervous. Back in the 1960s, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki was excavating Shanidar cave in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan when his team pulled soil samples from around a Neanderthal skeleton, one of several found at the site, and sent them to a paleobotanist. She found dense clusters of ancient pollen from several different flowering plants concentrated right around the body. Solecki went public with the idea that Neanderthals had laid the man to rest on a bed of flowers. It made international headlines. It reshaped how an entire species was seen, not brutish, but capable of tenderness. Then, for decades, other scientists took it apart. Critics pointed out that the region is home to burrowing rodents known to drag seeds and flowers into their tunnels and store them exactly where a body happens to be buried, meaning the pollen could have arrived thousands of years after the funeral, with no connection to grief at all. For a long time, the flower burial became a cautionary tale about wanting a story to be true so badly you stopped checking it properly. That's where it sat, unresolved, for almost 50 years. Then, in 2018, a team from Cambridge, led by paleoanthropologist Emma Pomeroy, went back into Shanidar cave and found something the original excavation had missed. Another Neanderthal skeleton, nicknamed Shanidar Z, positioned deliberately, curled on its side, with a stone placed carefully behind the head. New soil and plant analysis around the body reopened the flower question, and this time the clustering was harder to explain away as coincidence or rodent activity alone. Archaeologists are still divided. Nobody is claiming Neanderthals held funerals the way we'd recognize one. But the newest evidence has pulled a good number of skeptics back from definitely not to genuinely possible. And that shift alone says something. An entire branch of science spent decades trying to prove that grief was ours alone, and the evidence keeps refusing to fully cooperate. If Neanderthals really did grieve, then the specific ache you feel this year didn't start with your species. It's older than your species. Anthropologists who study small-scale societies today, groups still living close to the way most humans lived for most of history, find the same core pattern again and again. Loud, communal, unembarrassed mourning. Specific windows of time set aside for it, after which the group is expected to move forward together. In some groups, mourners cut their hair short as a visible marker of loss. In others, the whole community goes quiet for a fixed number of days. And in many of these cultures, saying the name of someone recently lost is treated as something you simply don't do, not because it's forgotten, but because it's too loud a sound to make casually. There's a piece of this story that explains why your version looks nothing like theirs. For most of human history, grief was loud on purpose. Public wailing, torn clothing, professional mourners hired specifically to cry hard enough for everyone watching. So what happened? Historians who study Western attitudes toward death point to a fairly recent shift as death moved out of the home and into hospitals, and the newly professionalized funeral industry took over through the 1800s and 1900s. Grief quietly moved from something a whole community performed together into something one person is expected to manage privately, on a schedule, without making anyone else uncomfortable. None of this looks like our version of grief. Quiet, private, scheduled around a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped up neatly in a beige card with a lighthouse on it. But underneath it, the same instinct is still doing the same job, forcing a community to notice a loss, together, instead of alone. That shift didn't stop moving. In 2022, the American Psychiatric Association formally added prolonged grief disorder to its diagnostic manual, a label for grief that lasts longer than roughly a year and still significantly disrupts someone's life. There's nothing wrong with naming real suffering so people can get help. But sit with the number for a second. A year. Somewhere in the world right now, in a handful of the same small-scale societies anthropologists still study, there is no such deadline. Grief simply lasts as long as it lasts, and the community absorbs it for as long as it takes. We didn't invent that instinct, we just learned to keep it quiet. Go back to that text message. 10 seconds, a heart, done. Somewhere in what's now Russia, a group of people spent an estimated several thousand hours stringing beads for 2 children they couldn't save, 34,000 years before either of you were born. Somewhere in what's now Iraq, someone, human or not quite human, may have pressed wildflowers into the dirt next to a body, and it took another species tens of thousands of years and 2 separate excavations just to take that gesture seriously. We didn't get better at grief. We just got faster at looking finished with it.